Dorian Yates, six-time Mr. Olympia champion and the most dominant competitive bodybuilder in the sport's history, once found himself sitting in the Amazon basin, violently ill, convinced he had been poisoned, hearing what he described as the voice of a female entity telling him to stop destroying himself. That moment was not his lowest point. It was, by his own account, the beginning of his recovery from one. The career itself was extraordinary, but the years that followed it were not. The retirement, the depression, the divorce, the sustained period of heavy drinking and the cumulative toll of injury, none of it received the same attention as the championships. Now in his mid-60s, Yates has spoken with unusual candor about what it means to spend an entire career building an identity around physical dominance and then have to abandon that identity entirely. What he has described is instructive and at times uncomfortable. To understand where he ended up, it helps to understand where he began. Yates did not come from a fitness background or a family with competitive ambitions. He grew up on a farm in Hurley, Warwickshire, rural England, working class, with no early indication of what was to come. His father died of a heart attack when Dorian was 13. After that, his mother relocated the family to the Birmingham area. Without direction and without a stable male presence at home, the teenage Yates drifted into street gangs and periodic trouble with the law. By 18, that trouble caught up with him. He and a group of friends were arrested while traveling across Birmingham and were placed in a detention center for 6 months. Inside, there was a basic weight room, a setup the staff used to enforce discipline and structure. Yates started lifting. For someone who had lost his father young and spent years without a clear sense of purpose, that recognition carried real weight. He made a decision not to return. He did not. When Yates was released, he began training in earnest in 1983 at Martin's Gym in the Temple Row area of Birmingham. This was not a commercial facility. It was a basement gym, dark, cramped, with no air conditioning. Yates trained there without an audience, and the arrangement suited him. He was not training for recognition. He was training toward a standard that did not yet exist. What his approach was shaped by the work of Mike Mensa, a bodybuilder and theorist who advocated high-intensity training, fewer sets, maximum effort on every repetition, and extended recovery between sessions. While most competitors of the era were training with high volume, logging hours of daily work on the same muscle groups, Yates operated on the opposite principle: brief, intense sessions followed by adequate rest. From the outside, it could look like undertraining. The results indicated otherwise. Walks from 1992 to 1997, Dorian Yates was the defining figure in competitive bodybuilding. Over that period, he won 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles, defeating top-level competitors including Kevin Levrone, Nasser El Sonbati, Sean Ray, and Lee Labrada. His nickname, The Shadow, reflected his method. He made few guest appearances, attended few expos, and gave few interviews. He trained in Birmingham, largely out of public view, and arrived at the Olympia each year 10 to 15 pounds heavier and more conditioned than most observers anticipated. He would compete, win, and withdraw. That pattern was intentional. Yates maintained a psychological edge over his competitors that extended beyond his physical development. While others were vocal about their intentions, he was already executing. When he stepped onto the Olympia stage for the first time and won in Helsinki in 1992, the bodybuilding community had no clear frame of reference for what it was seeing. He was larger, leaner, and more detailed than his predecessors, not simply a better version of what had come before, but a recalibration of the competitive standard itself. Yates is widely credited with establishing what became known as the mass monster era in bodybuilding, a period in which sheer size became the primary metric of success. The competitors who followed in that tradition, Ronnie Coleman, Marcus Ruhl, Big Ramy, built on a foundation Yates laid during his years in Birmingham. What that foundation cost him is a history less frequently examined. The victories appeared effortless from the outside. Behind them, Yates was managing significant physical strain. He has stated that he used steroids consistently for 12 years, from 1985 until his retirement from professional competition in 1997. He has been more candid about this than most champions of his era. He was monitored by a physician throughout, with regular blood work, and he did not approach the subject carelessly. Even so, the cumulative toll of a 12-year competitive career at that level was substantial. The most visible costs were injuries. During preparation for the 1994 Mr. Olympia, he tore his left bicep, which required management and rehabilitation. He continued to compete. He won. Then in 1997, the final year of his career, the injuries became more severe. Yates sustained a torn left tricep, a significant setback that contributed directly to his decision to retire from competition. That tear occurred 3 weeks before the Olympia. He still competed. He won his 6th consecutive title, largely on one functional arm. There was also a health crisis that year that received little public attention at the time. In a video published in March 2025, Yates described a life-threatening episode that occurred 6 weeks before the 1997 competition. He began coughing up blood. He underwent a blood transfusion and laser treatment to close a damaged vein. When the attending physician asked what he was taking, Yates listed everything: steroids, growth hormone, an anti-estrogen compound, and an anti-inflammatory his doctor had prescribed for a shoulder injury. The physician identified the anti-inflammatory as the likely cause. It was highly toxic to the stomach lining and indicated for use no longer than 6 weeks. Yates had been taking it for 2 years. At the time of his 6th Olympia win, he had recently had a blood transfusion, was still on the substance that had caused the bleeding, and was competing with a torn tricep. The physical and psychological discipline involved in that sequence is difficult to quantify. It also illustrates what the operating logic of elite-level bodybuilding does to a person's relationship with physical distress. The competitive environment conditions athletes to continue past signals that would otherwise indicate a stop. What happens when that system, that deeply conditioned drive to push through, no longer has competition as its outlet, is a question his subsequent years would begin to answer. When Yates retired in 1997, he didn't taper down or ease out gradually. His mindset had always been all or nothing, so he stopped completely. After 12 years on steroids, he walked away entirely. A physique that had required thousands of calories a day and hours of structured training to maintain was abandoned almost overnight. He had been known as the Shadow, considered the most physically imposing competitor in the sport. That chapter ended abruptly. He later described what followed. Retirement from your vocation and your passion in life can cause depression. So I had that, and somebody very close to me passed away, and my marriage was not in a good place. All of it hit me at the same time, so I had a real hard time with depression for a year and a half. The abrupt end to extreme exercise and the cessation of performance-enhancing substances, both of which alter brain chemistry significantly, coincided with the loss of professional identity, the death of someone close to him, and a deteriorating marriage. After the divorce, Yates spent several years involved with a series of relationships and a lifestyle that included heavy drinking and recreational use. This period rarely features in retrospective accounts of his career. It is, however, a pattern that appears across elite sport at the point of retirement, and bodybuilding produces a particularly severe version of it. The sport demands an almost total subordination of the individual to the pursuit of the physique. When that pursuit ends, the question of what remains becomes acute. For Yates, that question proved difficult to answer, and he has stated that for others in the sport, it has proved fatal. Yates eventually relocated to the Marbella area in Spain, leaving Birmingham behind. He began the process of rebuilding his life not around the identity of the Shadow, but around himself as an individual. The distinction mattered. The Shadow was a competitive persona. Dorian Yates, the person, had spent little time outside of it. He shifted away from the extreme training that had defined his career, redirecting his attention toward general fitness and well-being. Where he had previously structured his life around squatting and bench pressing, he began practicing yoga and meditation. For a man whose identity had been built on the most extreme muscle-building regimen the sport had seen, this represented a fundamental change, not just in method but in his understanding of what the body was for. The shift that accelerated this process occurred during a trip to Brazil. Yates was on a boat on the Amazon River, anticipating what he expected to be a social evening. He asked his guide about obtaining cocaine and vodka. The guide instead mentioned ayahuasca. Yates consumed it without a clear sense of what to expect. Shortly after, he became violently ill and was uncertain whether he had been poisoned. He then experienced what he described as a female entity, communicating a single message: stop poisoning yourself. For a man who had spent 12 years using anabolic substances, and several subsequent years using alcohol and recreational drugs heavily, the timing was not lost on him. He took it seriously. He later also tried DMT, which he described as a powerful life-changing medicine that gave him a new perspective on life. Yates frames these experiences not as recreational use, but as psychological medicine, processes that helped him examine decades of accumulated experience, move past the identity he had constructed around competitive success, and reconnect with a more fundamental sense of self. He now runs ayahuasca healing retreats in Costa Rica in partnership with the Soltara Healing Center, hosting small groups and guiding participants through similar experiences. What an engagement with meditation, yoga, and plant medicine reshaped how he defined the things he had previously oriented his life around. Following the Amazon experience, Yates defined success as having a positive impact on the world, and happiness as something achieved through self-acceptance. From a man who had previously defined both through 6 consecutive Olympia titles and the physical response they generated, the shift was substantial. In 2008, at the Arnold Classic, he met Brazilian fitness model and IFBB Pro champion Glass Ferreira. She spoke little English at the time. They formed a connection regardless, and she has been his partner ever since. They live together in Marbella. One of the more notable things Yates does today is speak candidly about the sport, without the constraints of sponsorship obligations or competitive interests. He has become one of its more direct critics, in part because he has no professional reason to soften his assessments. He has stated, "I think each generation of bodybuilders is pushing the chemical envelope a little bit more. He described speaking with people who told him they were using more substances casually outside of any competitive context than he had used to win the Mr. Olympia. His response was straightforward. The levels are unnecessary and the consequences will be serious. In a discussion on the True Geordie podcast, Yates addressed the long-term effects of steroid use, using insulin as an example. Bodybuilders use it to increase the muscle's absorption of nutrients. He stated that the long-term negative effects significantly outweigh the short-term gains, and that insulin used alongside other substances is likely to shorten life expectancy considerably. Yates stopped taking steroids at age 35 after 12 years of use, citing concerns about health and longevity. His position on recreational use was direct. "I don't think it's worth taking steroids unless you want to compete." On hobbyist lifters who continue using them, he said, "When your self-worth is caught up in being that guy, it almost becomes an addiction. If steroid-induced muscle gain was making you feel good, when you come off, it's going to be a rough ride." The research is beginning to support what Yates has been stating for years. A 2025 study published in the European Heart Journal found that professional bodybuilders had a 5.2 times higher risk of sudden cardiac death than amateurs. Autopsies of 5 bodybuilders found that 4 had an enlarged heart and thickening of the heart muscle, conditions that increase the likelihood of heart failure. The researchers noted that bodybuilding involves extreme strength training, rapid weight loss strategies including severe dietary restriction and dehydration, and widespread use of performance-enhancing substances. They indicated that these practices place significant strain on the cardiovascular system, increase the risk of irregular heart rhythm, and may lead to structural changes in the heart over time. The bodybuilding community has watched prominent figures die at unusually young ages for decades. The broader argument Yates is making, that the sport has developed a culture in which pursuing an extreme physique has normalized medical practices that warrant serious ethical scrutiny, is one the industry has been slow to engage with directly. Sustaining a lean body weight of 260 to 300 pounds places severe stress on the body's organs, particularly the cardiovascular system. It is not a condition that can be maintained indefinitely without consequence. Most athletes who reach that level will face significant cardiovascular problems before the age of 50, in some cases earlier. Yates avoided the worst outcomes, a result of several factors, including the medical supervision he had during his career, the fact that he retired at 35, and the steps he took afterward to address the physical damage. He is also direct about how close things came to going differently, particularly given a life-threatening episode 6 weeks before his final Olympia appearance. Dorian Yates has articulated something that few in the sport have been willing to say clearly. Bodybuilding at the elite level doesn't just consume your body, it consumes your entire sense of self. And when it ends, that consumption doesn't stop, it turns inward. Most people who've spent years building significant amounts of muscle struggle to mentally accept losing it. For many, that inability leads to preventable health crises, in men as young as 40 to 50. When identity is built around a physique, losing the physique feels like losing the person. Many athletes respond not by rebuilding their sense of self, but by trying to maintain the physique past the point where it's possible, or by deteriorating in the attempt. Yates put it plainly, when your self-worth is caught up in being that guy, it almost becomes an addiction. He lived this. He was the shadow for 6 years, the most prominent bodybuilder in the world. Then abruptly, and not on his own timeline, because injuries forced the decision, he wasn't. No one had prepared him for that. There was no protocol, no post-career mental health support, no framework for becoming a regular person after functioning, by most measures, as something beyond one for the better part of a decade. What helped him through it was a combination of factors. Geography. Moving to Spain put physical distance between him and that identity. Spirituality. Psychedelic experiences opened a perspective he couldn't have reached otherwise. A new relationship, meeting Gloss, gave him something to move toward rather than away from. And the same stubbornness that kept him training through torn biceps, torn triceps, and internal bleeding, now redirected toward rebuilding a life worth living. He did it, but he is also acutely aware that many of his peers did not. He takes that seriously. Dorian Yates has maintained his fitness well into retirement. At 62, he was still displaying a muscular back and a lean physique, a notable level of conditioning for someone his age. At 64, that trajectory continues. He now trains twice per week in the gym, supplemented by bike rides, stretching, mobility work, and occasional yoga or Pilates. He is lean, muscular, and more flexible than he was in his 30s. The physique he carries today bears little resemblance to his competition years. The current version of Yates is athletic in build, slimmed down, with visible muscle that looks sustainable over the long term. When fans ask on Instagram whether he's considered competing again, his responses carry a quiet finality. That person no longer exists. And for Yates, that is not a loss. It is the point. He founded DY Nutrition and has worked as a coach for both competitors and lifestyle fitness enthusiasts. He became a public speaker and participated in seminars covering bodybuilding and personal development. Through his DY Academy, he works with several competitors as their trainer and coach, most notably second-generation bodybuilder Sergio Oliva Jr. He still owns Temple Gym in Birmingham, the same gym where a young man from Warwickshire worked out who he was going to become. That gym still stands, and Yates never sold it. His son Lewis Yates has taken up bodybuilding, working closely within his father's legacy, trained not only in the mechanics of the sport, but in the philosophy of how to pursue it without allowing it to define you entirely. Yates's message today is straightforward and hard-won. Without health, everything else is secondary. A person can have an exceptional physique, defined muscle, low body fat, size and symmetry in equal measure, but without a healthy functioning body, none of it holds its value. Living as long as possible with a high quality of life is the goal that matters.